Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I'm Lou House with Bill Greaves. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Lou.
And welcome to Black Journal. Tonight we explore the political and economic development of two African countries in East Africa, ends and beginnings.
Along the east coast of Africa are the countries Black Journal will visit tonight, Kenya and Tanzania. These countries have reacted to and fared differently under this present-day exploitation, or neo-colonialism. In our examination of East Africa, we'll focus principally on Nairobi, capital of Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, capital of Tanzania. These cities are not intended to be representative of the countries as a whole, any more than New York City is representative, for example, of our rural South. But some insight into the attitudes and lifestyles of our East African brothers can be gained by focusing on the capital cities. In many respects, our report on East Africa may be considered a subjective one. Tony Batten, producer of this report, found that a black film crew visiting the mother continent for the first time does respond subjectively to the dance, music, art, and life of our brothers in Africa. We who are Africans from abroad realize that in reporting on Africa, we are in fact reporting on ourselves. East Africa, ends and beginnings.
One thinks of Africa and thinks of what? Rhythms, black people in a jungle dancing, masked and perhaps scarred with body marks. These kinds of Western cliches about East Africa are ridiculous in light of what East Africa is about. Some of the old ways still exist in this part of Africa, and if Westerners could understand these ways, all of East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania would not seem mysterious, savage, or very exotic. But these particular Western cliches are not innocent. They were and are designed to put the Western mind at rest and to keep a group of black people in economic bondage. Despite such cliches, such Western myths about East Africa, the African brother is getting it together. It's true there are animals in Kenya, but the Nairobi National Game Preserve, Kenya's largest, surrounds the Nairobi airport, the busiest in all Africa. Ironically, as more jet charter flights arrive, with increasing numbers of tourists, more and more animals depart, never to return to this part of East Africa. This has been one price the Kenya government has had to pay in order to change Kenya into a technologically developed nation. Before the process of development is completed, Kenya will have to give up more of what is beautiful and good about her country. And widespread problems, lack of proper education, disease, and growing unemployment have been far from eliminated. For the past 6 years, the man most responsible for government policy in Kenya is the country's first elected president, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. Emerging from the Mau Mau revolution of the 1950s, Kenyatta, mostly through the force of his own personality, has held the country together despite pressing tribal animosities and growing disparity between haves and have-nots. Here, celebrating Kenya's 6th year of independence, Kenyatta states his desire to maintain an economic system of free enterprise and a multiracial society. The retention of many former colonialists as advisors is a major problem in Kenya because of the heavy investment prior to independence of the Europeans, or Muzungus as they are called in Swahili. Total social development of the African is held back. The presence of blacks in power positions has disturbed whites who knew Kenya before independence. The colonialists had as their goal the complete exploitation of East Africa through what they called development. Based upon capitalism, this development set as its measure Western ideals of education and culture, society, and how one ought to go about getting things done. In Kenya, the measure of a man's success is often how closely he can imitate the lifestyles and accomplishments of his former political masters. This crack Kenyan regiment strikes one as being more British as it drills than African. Its officers are trained in England and return to Kenya filled with the neat and swaggering caricature of the stereotyped British sergeant major. And throughout Kenya, there are other indications of how thoroughly the English presence has pervaded. Underneath the smile of the white advisor may hide the desperate understanding that his future may depend upon a roll of political dice. The African in Kenya is prone to reassess the value of the European from time to time. But many whites still find it worthwhile to stay on, remaining more and more in the background.
Nchi yetu ya Kenya kweli ni mzuri. Nchi yetu ya Kenya kweli ni mzuri.
These are the people. In Swahili, the wananchi. The wananchi have questions of their own about development in Kenya. Enough questions to dump over a dozen members of the government in a recent general election. They are rural people mostly, but they are shifting to the cities in large numbers. While not representative of life in the countryside or in the smaller towns, Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, has become the only metropolis that Africans, more than 40 tribes of them in Kenya, look to for their future. Morning in Nairobi is filled with the snarl of thousands of workers entering a city in which most cannot afford to live. And yet, it is this growing mass of black humanity on which the future of Africa depends. A combination of struggle and endurance shaped the African's nature, his soul, his happiness. Superimposed over everything in Nairobi is a desire for American and European modernity. There are minibus trips to see lions and music in hotels. In return for this modernity, the government provides investors with the privilege of transferring out of Kenya business profits after taxation through the Foreign Investments Protection Act. The struggle to bring Kenya from an agriculturalist state into a 20th century industrialist nation is thought out and worked at here in these buildings. Nairobi has been described, paradoxically, as a smallish British city, a gem of Africa. But now, it's developing into an enormous downtown glut. New buildings, mostly for government, rim the skyline. Others are not within a price range which would make many Africans feel comfortable. In addition to agriculture, tourism and trade earn great wealth for investors in Kenya. Tourism is largely controlled by whites. Trade is generally in the hands of Asians. Although many Asians, Indians, Pakistanis, and Goans hold Kenyan or British passports, their way of life in East Africa is ending under the pressures of Africanization. The process of Africanization is viewed by the African as getting a job or business formerly held by a non-African. In most cases, this means a slot in an economy controlled by Asians. The only long-standing middle class in East Africa is made up of Asians. Now many blacks feel the Asian must go. Because he can read English and may be well educated in Western ways, life in the village often no longer holds its former meaning for many East Africans. The average black man in Kenya, the wananchi, continues to trek to the big city. In Nairobi, this black man must hunt, he must wait, he must pray for some work that mostly does not exist. Life outside the cities has changed also. An open market in Kikuyu country operates in the old ways, but city attitudes creep in. It's as if the people want a distance of privacy. The impact of independence is meaningful, but still carries problems. Here, with Kenyatta nearby, the Kikuyu feel secure. They earn a living from subsistence farming on shambas of a few acres. During the colonial period, this land was part of the White Highlands. Now it has been returned to the people. Here a man can make enough to eat, but not much more. Nearby is Gatundu. Gatundu is the birthplace of Jomo Kenyatta. It is here that Kenyatta still lives, preferring the lush, soft landscape of the countryside to the constant hum of Nairobi. It is land such as this that gains Kenya much of its revenue from agriculture. This land can grow coffee, for example, one of Kenya's main export cash crops. It is grown on small cooperatives operated by blacks and large plantations, most still owned by Europeans. Coffee is controlled by the Kenya Planters Cooperative Union, or KPCU, and the International Coffee Board. The KPCU controls growing techniques and milling. The Coffee Board, governed by European and American interests, decides quotas and prices. Kenyatta's brother, J.J. Muigai, is liaison officer between KPCU and the International Coffee Board. We asked Mr. Muigai how the relationship to the International Board is maintained and how KPCU originated.
This started back in 1937, but formerly there was another cooperative somewhere called Ruiru, and this amalgamated with another union, coffee union, and they formed this KPCU back in 1937.
To what extent do the African farmers participate in this cooperative? What is their function?
Their function is, you see, these cooperatives, they are just a cooperation of a number of people who plant coffee in a small area, say from an acre and up to 10 acres. And because it is very expensive to build a factory, they formed cooperatives in order to process their coffee in one place and they sell it in a group.
After initial sorting, the coffee beans are popped from their shells and then stored in fermentation tanks. The beans remain here for 72 hours. They are periodically turned to keep the fermentation process even. After fermentation, the beans are washed to remove the gum that has developed during the process. The beans are dried and washed again, and then they are taken to racks for final sorting. More than 70,000 tons of coffee were produced and exported by Kenya in 1969, much of which was grown on cooperatives like these. On these cooperatives, a lot of the growing process is done by hand. The market for Kenya coffee is very good, and cooperative members like these Dunbarry villagers derive a major portion of their livelihood from coffee. Under this cooperative arrangement, the farmers consolidate their crop and turn it over to the Kenya Planters Cooperative Union. When the coffee is sold at auction in Nairobi, the farmers get their money. But a coffee berry disease and a ceiling imposed on Kenya's export quota, only 2% of the world's total, by the International Coffee Board, help to keep the net profits for the African cooperative farmer in Kenya pitifully low. This coffee milling plant is owned by the Kenya Planters Cooperative Union. The largest of its kind in the world, it is fully mechanized and in some areas operated by computer. The mill employs some 470 workers. With a total workforce of 250,000 in and around Nairobi, this mill provides only a fraction of the jobs required to support the population. We asked Mr. Moigai if profits for blacks would be increased were Kenya to sell its coffee unrestricted by the International Coffee Board.
No, we found we can sell better in the world more than looking market for ourselves. You see, we as Kenya, we don't take that coffee to sell in the other countries. We sell our coffee in the auction here, and the coffee dealers, they take that coffee, you know, into the world, in Germany, Britain, America, Canada, but we are not interested to take that coffee ourselves into the world. You see what I mean?
Are the Europeans who own coffee plantations taxed by the government for their ownership of that land?
There's no land taxation. Well, I'm not in a point of to verify there. I'm a bit doubtful about this land taxation, but let me come to coffee. Both societies or cooperatives and big plantations have to pay export tax to the government. When the coffee is sold here in the auction, every ton exported, at the moment, government takes 200 shillings, both from societies and the plantation.
The plant is a maze of highly technical machinery that grades, roasts, husks, and prepares the coffee for shipment. This mill is seen as an example of industrial progress in Kenya, and in reality, it is. But its very increased automation cuts back on jobs as well. But not all of Kenya's coffee is grown on cooperatives. Many European planters still retain large land holdings where coffee is produced. Coffee grown by Europeans is also milled at KPCU, but for the Europeans, the increased efficiency of the plant becomes a distinct advantage. Since their black plantation workers are lowly paid, the dollar margin of profits for the large landholder is even more greatly increased. Except for a tax declared on incomes earned only in Kenya by these large landholders, little or no revenue is gained by the government from them. We asked J.J. Moigai, a key figure in the relationship between coffee sales and the African farmer, what the revenue earned by Kenya coffee sales is used for.
Well, that's government running. It goes to the government revenue.
I see.
You know, government is the head of state, and it uses all that money, you know, the different...
But it doesn't specifically go back to...
To the coffee grower?
Right.
No.
I see.
It goes to the government treasury. No, once they get money, it's not kept aside to say that this is the coffee money.
Although conditions in Kenya are changing, life for the Muzungu who wishes to stay on as a Kenyan citizen or advisor is not all that different from the way it was before independence. Occasional mementos like this rickshaw, once pulled by Africans in races for the amusement of whites in front of this very hotel, are trotted out as if to reassure those who might dread another emergency, another Mau Mau. Kenyans, still young in independence, believe that changes for the better are taking place. They feel that these changes are long in coming and that development is slow. The government is bent on industrialization, while today most Kenyan people are still agriculturalists. The road to full national development based on free enterprise and capitalism is long. There is no work for those who may be only partially trained, and Kenyan choices for the future are baffling. But the land is rich, the earth true. And perhaps the real answer to Kenya's problems are hidden in the souls of her people. 600 miles from Nairobi, south and on the coast of Tanzania, there is a ghost town. once ruled from the Arab Sultanate on Zanzibar, and once the trading capital of the whole east coast of Africa. Bagamoyo now sleeps. Down such trails, slaves walked through these palms to boats lying just offshore. Arab boats took black men as slaves to Zanzibar and on to Arabia. The Arabs took slaves and ivory from East Africa for generations. From Dodoma to Ujiji to Bagamoyo, men sold each other for profit. But Islamic slavery is less precise than Western slavery. A slave could be a teacher, craftsman, writer, a laborer, a man. For the Arab sheiks, with black slaves as companions, the untilled desert beyond Africa became a grandeur to be wondered. These crumbled ruins and Arab cemetery attest to the fact that Islamic culture was firmly entrenched on the east coast of Africa well before the 19th century. The Arabs left Islam, a sense of trade, and a common tongue, Swahili. From these conquered beginnings would come a new thought based on the old ways, African ways. The thought, African socialism based on familyhood, sharing, and self-reliance. Sharing and self-reliance are words common in Tanzania today, and so too is Islam. A Muslim wedding celebration awakens the town of Bagamoyo, and its music transports us to the past and to other unchanging times. The history of Tanganyika's independence and development, beginning with its colonial occupation by Germany in the last half of the 19th century, differs considerably from its northern neighbor, Kenya. The Germans, latecomers to Africa, inherited what trade in ivory and diamonds that was left, allowed the continuance of the Arab slave trade, and made attempts to settle the countryside from 1885 until they lost the territory before World War I. From the 15th century to the 18th, the Portuguese established settlements for commerce and for slave trade. And the Portuguese left nothing except the impractical bondage of all the land they settled. Now revolution in Mozambique to the south of Tanzania is part of their colonialist legacy. The Arabs, however, left much of their culture. Swahili, the language of the Arab trade, has been used in Tanzania as an incredibly unifying force which cuts across the 123 different tribal languages that exist in Tanzania. The wind instrument this musician is playing is a muzuni, an Arab instrument. These are the Arab legacies which have helped Tanzanian development. In 1919, Tanganyika became a British Mandate territory under the League of Nations. But the British already had Kenya. The rush to settle that country was on. In Tanganyika, with less arable land and less development of an extensive infrastructure, railroads, electrical systems, and schools, total development lagged far behind Kenya's. But Tanzania was able to keep more of its soul. Dar es Salaam, or Haven of Peace, became the capital of Tanganyika in 1891. Today, with a population of over 250,000 people, Dar is the capital of Tanzania, the United Republic of Tanganyika and Zanzibar. Tanzania achieved full internal independence from Britain in 1961. The harbor at Dar es Salaam is one of the busiest on the East African coast. The city is tropical, but energetic. Business begins at 7:30 in the morning and ends at 4 to get the most out of the productive, cool daylight hours. There's a different feeling in Dar es Salaam than in Nairobi. It's hard to tell what causes this difference, the lifestyle of the Tanzanian, or something more important, his attitude. Unlike Kenya, these new buildings are not all that they seem. Most are extensions of already existing structures built to accommodate an existing need. Along the streets of the market section of Kariakoo, a difference between the lifestyles of Kenya and Tanzania is clear. Tanzanians like to call this part of Dar Alabama. They say it has some heavy soul. Here, different from the markets upcountry and because of the Muslim influence, men carry on the trade. Although the city streets are busy and there is constant movement, the current Tanzanian government has emphasized rural development. This has been done in order to keep within the framework of the government's policy of socialism and to more completely equalize the lives of the rural people and city people around the basic necessities of life. The march to socialist development by Tanzania can be seen as a total government commitment. Unlike Kenya, the Tanzanian government has banned all beggars from the streets of the capital, preferring to care for them properly in centers and to heighten the self-reliant image of Tanzania. Awaiting a visiting European statesman is a man regarded by Africa and much of the world as Africa's most dynamic leader, Mwalimu, the teacher, Julius K. Nyerere, president of Tanzania. Seated with his two vice presidents, Nyerere chats informally and is relaxed. Somewhat like Macaria's, Nyerere's career has been filled with surprises and political turns. When first elected prime minister, Nyerere resigned in 1962, and for most of a year stumped around Tanzania, discovering again just what his people needed most. In December of that